Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is going to be another Canadian Soldier Reacts video, and today we're going to be looking at the forgotten warriors who terrified the Japanese in World War II. So, let's get at it.
The year was 1815, and the British Empire was still licking its wounds from the bloody and painful American Revolution. In spite of its recent failures, however, Britain could still be, relatively speaking, considered to be living in its glory days. They had acquired and managed to hold territory all over the world, with the continents of Africa and Asia being hardest hit. With that said, it was inevitable that the small...
Yeah, that kind of shows you something, right? The British Empire pretty much encompassed the world at that point.
Country of Nepal, just north of British-ruled India, was to be invaded next. The British, of course, made true to this, and although they were expecting minimal resistance, the Nepali Gurkha regiments fought so ferociously and the British took so many casualties that High Command breathed a sigh of relief when a peace treaty was hastily reached with the small nation. This treaty then allowed the British to recruit and ally their former enemy, and in World War II, the help of the Gurkhas was quickly enlisted by the desperate allies. And
so, this is the first and only time I've ever heard of something like this happening. You go out to invade a country, and they beat you so badly that you come back to them and ask them if you can recruit them into your army, and they say yes. I'm a little bit surprised.
And these Gurkhas proved to be some of the fiercest soldiers that the war had to offer.
So, even in Canada, the Gurkhas have a fearsome reputation. Now, I mean, there are some people out there that say it's all reputation, but when every country is talking about how good their soldiers are, there's got to be some truth to it somewhere.
Better to die than to be a coward is the profound Gurkha motto that strikes fear into the hearts of enemies. To this day, the proud Gurkha men and the four main ethnic groups who exist under the name still carry...
Four main ethnic groups. Now that's something I didn't know. I'd be interested if anyone knows anything more about that. I'd love to have you let me know down in the comments. Also, I'm looking, and some of these guys have some sort of a cap badge. Actually, it looks very much like their actual cap badges on the side of their hats, and a lot of them don't. And I'm not seeing any rank on them, unless that is a rank there. Is this a corporal, maybe? I'm not really sure.
With them a traditional 18-inch knife known as the kukri. It was said that once a kukri was drawn from the heat of battle, it had to taste blood, and if not, its owner had to cut himself before returning it to its sheath. So,
see, that's what I thought too. However, I said that in an earlier video, and someone corrected me in the comments. And I have to be honest, it does seem a little silly, especially in this day and age, that you would have to cut yourself every time you took your kukri out, because you gotta train with it, right? So it may just be folklore that people just keep getting wrong.
Let's get into why the Gurkhas were such badasses and what they actually did in World War II. By the time of the war, most, if not all, Gurkha units had been absorbed by the British Army. This meant that wherever the Brits fought, you could expect to find a couple of Gurkha battalions nestled in there as well. According to one description of the Gurkhas by author...
Yeah, see, there's that cap badge that I was just talking about. These two guys are wearing maroon berets, which means that they're airborne, and you can see the Pegasus patch on this guy. I believe... So this is either a warrant officer or a major, and I don't know how to tell the difference in the British Army. So, although I will point out that this guy's got a button undone.
Ralph G. Martin, they were always smiling, always laughing like a bunch of kids just young enough to think the whole world was a big joke. But when night came, these smiling, laughing little guys would creep quietly out between the lines with their kukris, their 18-inch razor-sharp curved knives, and when they came across a big German guy, they would hack at his thighs. If somebody came at them with a bayonet, they would chop at his arms. Otherwise, they just confined themselves to lopping
I actually had a replica of one of these when I was a kid. Had no idea what to do with it.
off heads, which they would do quickly, cleanly, with a professional touch.
That looks like sergeant stripes.
The Gurkhas, it should also be added, had an almost unbreakable relationship with the British. Their morale in battle, while surrounded by both fellow Gurkhas...
Oh, that's interesting. So, lots of privates there. Senior private, I don't know what they call it in the British forces, but... So this is just two different levels of private. Oh, and they got the red dagger too. So in Canada, you never... So this is some sort of a parade rest. In Canada, you never parade rest with your weapon at shoulder arms. You always take your weapon down. Or at least when I was in. You always take your weapon down if you're going to stand at ease or stand easy.
Gurkhas and Brits was resolute, and both the British and Gurkha men came to be fiercely proud of the close military bonds forged together between these two completely different and distinct warrior cultures on war battlefields all around the world. Anyways, getting back on track, the 43 battalions of Gurkhas not only fought the Germans in North Africa...
43 battalions. On average, there's like anywhere between 8 and 1,200 men in a battalion, or at least that's what it is in Canada. So, you know, on average about 1,000 men. 40... What do you say, 43, 48 battalions? That's a lot of men.
Africa and Italy, of course, but they also gave the Japanese nightmares in Malaya, Singapore, Burma, and Northeast India. The Gurkha battalions that fought against the Japanese weren't constrained by the politics of the European theatre, and the fighting that went on there was much more chaotic. This led many Gurkhas, and the Brits alongside them, to develop a knowledge of the Japanese and a deep and combined hatred for them and their practices. This invariably led to...
Yeah, I've heard this before. The Japanese were not considered honorable, or their practices and our practices were very different.
Some very interesting stories, and we will now highlight the best of them for you in this video. Also, it's worth remembering for these stories that the Gurkha preferred method of fighting was with their kukri, and these featured pretty heavily in most of these stories, including our first one, which comes from the accounts of a Gurkha soldier who fought the Japanese in the China-India-Burma theatre of war. Suddenly, the Gemara stood up and screamed, "Gokali Ayo!" We all yelled in unison and followed him into the Japanese trenches. We rushed through the maze of narrow trenches, thrusting, slashing, and chopping at the surprised enemy.
So, this is another interesting parallel. When I went through battle school in 1987, we had Russian trench lines, but they were basically World War II style trench lines that we practiced assaulting. It was I don't know that it's still done today, but it was difficult.
Some tried to withdraw into the bunkers, but ran into other Gurkhas and were chopped down instantly. Then, they counterattacked from the western slope. One Japanese commander, with his sword drawn, rushed out from the main bunker screaming, "Banzai, banzai, banzai!" His men, with fixed bayonets, also charged and tried to flank us. We jumped out of the trenches to meet them. The Japanese officer cut down one Gurkha, then another. But then, just as quickly, the Jemedar sprang forward and decapitated the enemy officer.
Wow.
The Jemedar yelled, "Gokali Ayo, no prisoners," and we responded, "No prisoners, Gokali Ayo." The resultant collisions were of steel against steel, steel against flesh, and flesh against flesh. It was a killing frenzy among fanatic warriors. Our Lord Shiva, Goddess Kali, and Yama witnessed this brutal hand-to-hand fighting. It lasted about 15 minutes. Many Japanese escaped down the south slope, leaving 125 of their dead behind. Our platoon lost 2 men and 3 wounded. Our faces and uniforms were drenched with blood. This was one of the many testaments of bravery the Gurkhas showed.
So, this takes a lot of guts too. So that's barbed wire rather than razor wire. but that's small comfort. One catch and you're down on your face with this stuff. We still use this when I was in the 80s and 90s.
In World War II. Another source of bravery from these men came from the extremely close relationship they had with Britain, as stated before. The Gurkha men were known to form extremely close bonds of camaraderie with their British officers.
I have no idea what that is. Bren gun,
In one
maybe?
infamous instance in Burma, a Gurkha unit observed a dozen half-starved Japanese who appeared willing to surrender. The British Lieutenant Colonel George Bellinger and several of his men then left cover to bring the Japanese in, when, in true Japanese fashion, the fanatical men who were pretending to surrender threw themselves flat on the ground with their machine guns, tearing into Bellinger and his unsuspecting men. The Gurkha unit that was in the vicinity and—
Yeah, I've heard stories like that before, and that's the kind of thing that that gave the Japanese a really bad reputation. After you've done that once, word gets around, and no one's ever going to attempt to take you prisoner again. You're basically just guaranteeing that your entire force is going to get slaughtered.
who had just witnessed this understandably became outraged, and the Japanese were quickly and summarily killed by the Gurkhas.
Yeah,
Although
and I don't
Gurkhas
blame
weren't
them.
terribly fond of taking Japanese prisoners in the first place, for the Gurkha men of the 1st Battalion 3rd Rifles, it would never happen again, and they never took another Japanese captive for the remainder of the war. All in all, a total of 11 Gurkhas won Victoria Crosses for gallantry and courage in the face of adversity in World War II.
That is a difficult thing to do. I don't remember the exact criteria for a Victoria Cross, but basically you have to do something that changes the course of the battle. And I mean, there's a number of criteria for it, but you get one of those, you're pretty badass.
One of the most famous, and one that many of you have likely heard of, was Rifleman Lachiman Gurung, who also fought in Burma. The citation for his award goes like this. At Tongdao in Burma, on the west bank of the Irrawaddy on the night of the 12th to 13th of May 1945, Rifleman Lachiman Gurung was manning the most forward post of his platoon. At 1 AM, at least 200 enemy assaulted his company position. The brunt of the attack was borne by Rifleman Lachiman Gurung's section and by his own post in particular. This post dominated a jungle path leading up to his platoon locality. Before assaulting, the enemy hurled innumerable grenades at the position from close range. One grenade fell on the lip of Rifleman Lachiman Gurung's trench. He at once grasped it and hurled it back at the enemy. Almost immediately, another—
So that's interesting. In training, I've done something similar with a CS gas grenade. And I got in trouble for it too. I think it was our final X in battle school, and the instructor started lobbing CS gas grenades into our, they said it was CS gas grenades. They called gas. We all had our gas masks on. Other than that, I don't know. It might have been smoke grenades for all I know. But I picked the damn thing up. We had gloves on. We had our winter gloves on, which is a wool inner liner or something like that, and then a leather outer liner. So you could pick it up, and because these things were burning, right? I picked it up and I tossed it back. And one of the sergeants in my battalion has a story of doing that in Croatia, actually. But obviously this is way more badass.
The grenade fell directly inside the trench. Again, this rifleman snatched it up and threw it back. A third grenade then fell just in front of the trench. He attempted to throw it back, but it exploded in his hand, blowing off his fingers, shattering his right arm, and severely wounding him in the face, body, and right leg. His two comrades were also badly wounded and lay helpless in the bottom of the trench. The enemy, screaming and shouting, now formed up shoulder to shoulder and attempted to rush the position by sheer weight of numbers. Rifleman Lachiman Gurung, regardless of his wounds, fired and loaded his rifle with his left hand, maintaining a continuous and steady rate of fire. Wave after wave of fanatical attacks were thrown in by the enemy over the next 4 hours, and all were repulsed with heavy casualties.
That is incredible.
For 4 hours after being severely wounded, Rifleman Lachimang Gurung remained alone at his post, waiting with the perfect calm for each attack, which he met with fire at point-blank range.
I'm hoping he bound up his arm. Holy crap.
From his rifle, determined not to give 1 inch of ground. Of the 87 enemy dead counted in the immediate vicinity of the company locality, 31 lay in front of this rifleman's section, the key to the whole position. Had the enemy succeeded in overrunning and occupying Rifle Lachimang Gurung's trench, the whole of the reverse slope position would have been dominated and turned. This rifleman, by his magnificent example, so inspired his comrades to resist to the last that although surrounded and cut off for 3 days and 2 nights, they held and smashed every attack. His outstanding gallantry and extreme devotion to duty in the face of overwhelming odds were the main factors in defeating the enemy. So, all in all, it's safe to say that the Gurkhas were some of the most formidable men of the war, and it wasn't only the Japanese that they gave nightmares to. They are the best of friends and the worst of enemies, and there are plenty more stories in the North African and Italian theatre, as well as recent stories in Afghanistan too. However, in this video, I of course focused on the heroics of them in the Asian theatre of war.
Wow. So, yeah, the Gurkhas, pretty fearsome fighting force. I think I've said this before. I've worked with a lot of British units. I've worked with the Desert Rats. I've worked with Queen's Own, or the King's Own Royal Border Regiment. I think it was Queen's Own. I can't remember. 4th of Foot. Anyway, I looked them up recently. I guess they've been disbanded. But I worked with them in Yugoslavia back in, I want to say 97, I think. 97 or 98. But I've never, that I can remember, worked with the Gurkhas. Worked with the Royal Marines too. Worked with the Airborne. Worked with a lot of them. But so I've said it before. I'm going to say it again though. The Gurkhas have my everlasting respect and admiration, because those guys, man. I think based on everything I'm hearing, their reputation is well deserved. So anyway, thanks for watching, guys. If you liked the video, please leave a like down below. Consider subscribing to the channel. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers, and if you do, it will help you know when I put more content out. And please comment down below, good or bad. I love hearing everything that you guys talk about. So thanks a lot. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.